They called her the runt, the mistake, the stain on the Sterling Pack's legacy. For 21 years, Ilara Vance washed the floors of the people who murdered her spirit, waiting for a wolf that never came. They thought her silence was weakness. They thought her submission was permanent. But they forgot one fundamental rule of nature: the brighter the gold, the hotter the fire required to forge it. When the High Court arrived to judge her, they didn't find a victim. They found a queen, and by the time her golden wolf bared its teeth, it was too late to run. The rain in Washington state didn't wash things clean, it just made the mud deeper. Ilara Vance knew that better than anyone. At 21 years old, her hands looked like they belonged to a woman of 50. They were red-chapped and currently submerged in dishwater that had turned a grotesque shade of grey. The sounds of the party filtered through the heavy oak door separating the kitchen from the grand hall of Greystone Manor. Laughter, the clinking of crystal champagne flutes, the heavy, confident footsteps of wolves who had shifted years ago, wolves who belonged. "Ilara, move your ass." The shout came from Chef Miller, a human who compensated for his lack of a wolf by being louder than everyone else. "Alpha Sterling needs another case of the 98 Cabernet. Now." "Yes, Chef," Ilara whispered, drying her hands on her stained apron. She hurried to the cellar, her leg aching. It had never healed right after Jessica Pree, the Beta's daughter, had shoved her down the library stairs 3 years ago. The pack doctor hadn't wasted resources on an Omega without a wolf, so it had healed crooked. As she grabbed the heavy crate of wine, she caught her reflection in the dusty glass of a cabinet. Pale skin, dark circles under eyes the color of faded moss, and hair that was meant to be honey blonde, but looked dull and lifeless, tied back in a rag. She looked exactly like what she was, the pack slave. Ilara wasn't born a slave. Her father, Thomas Vance, had been a respected warrior. But when he and her mother died in a rogue ambush 10 years ago, an ambush that conveniently left the current Alpha's father in power, Ilara's status had plummeted. When she failed to shift at 16, she was legally demoted to Omega Rank 4 domestic servitude. She hauled the wine up the stairs, breathing hard. She pushed through the service door and entered the grand hall. The room was suffocating with the scent of pine musk and expensive perfume. It was the engagement party. Declan Sterling, the newly appointed Alpha, stood in the center of the room. He was handsome, in that sharp, cruel way, dark-haired jawline, like cut glass, wearing a tailored tuxedo that cost more than Ilara's life was worth. Hanging off his arm was Jessica Pree. She was wearing a red silk dress that looked like a fresh wound. "Well, look who finally crawled out of the basement," Jessica announced, her voice pitching high to cut through the conversation. The room went silent. 50 pairs of eyes landed on Ilara. "I brought the wine." "Alpha," Ilara said, keeping her head bowed. Eye contact was forbidden. Declan stepped forward. He took a glass from a nearby table, inspected it, and then looked at Ilara. "You're late, Ilara. We toasted 5 minutes ago." "The cellar key was misplaced, Alpha. Excuses," Jessica sneered. She walked over her heels, clicking on the marble. "You know, Declan, it's embarrassing. We have guests arriving from the High Court next week for the summit. Do we really want this serving them?" "She smells like dish soap and failure." The crowd chuckled. It was a low, ugly sound. Declan sighed, looking at Ilara with bored indifference. "Jess is right. You're an eyesore, Ilara." "I can leave Alpha," Ilara murmured, turning to go. "Stop," Declan commanded. The alpha tone in his voice forced Ilara's body to freeze against her will. It was painful, like a cramp, seizing her spine. "I didn't say you could leave. Jessica's glass is empty." Jessica smirked, holding out her goblet. Elara approached her hands, shaking under the weight of the wine bottle. She poured. Just as the red liquid reached the rim, Jessica deliberately jerked her hand forward. The wine splashed all over Jessica's red silk dress. "You clumsy bitch!" Jessica shrieked. The sound shattered the air. "This is custom Versace. I didn't—" Elara stammered, backing away. Smack! The sound of Jessica's hand connecting with Elara's cheek echoed through the hall. Elara fell back, hitting the floor hard. The impact jarred her bad leg, sending a spike of white-hot pain up her hip. "Look at her!" Jessica laughed, looking down. "She can't even stand up straight. How are you even related to Thomas Vance? He was a warrior. You're just nothing." Declan loomed over her. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't scold Jessica. He just looked annoyed that there was a scene. "Clean it up," Declan said coldly. "Not the dress, the floor." "And Elara?" Elara looked up, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes, Alpha. During the summit next week you are not to be seen. You will stay in the scullery. If High Alpha Cross or any of his delegation sees you, I will exile you to the rogue lands. Do you understand exile? For a wolf without a shift, that was a death sentence." "I understand," she whispered. "Good. Now get out of my sight." Elara scrambled to her feet, limping back toward the kitchen. As the door swung shut behind her, she heard the laughter resume. They were laughing at her pain. She collapsed against the cold stainless steel counter in the kitchen, sliding down to the floor. She buried her face in her knees. Why, she screamed internally. Why won't my wolf come? Why am I so weak? Deep inside her chest, something stirred. It wasn't the usual emptiness. It felt like a spark, a tiny burning ember buried under miles of ash. Soon a voice whispered in the back of her mind. It wasn't a voice she recognized. It sounded like ancient stones grinding together. "Soon, little one. They will burn." Elara lifted her head, looking around the empty kitchen. "Hello." Only the dripping faucet answered. 3 days later, the atmosphere at Greystone Manor shifted from festive to terrified. The summit was a rare event. Every 10 years, the High Council, the governing body of all werewolf packs in North America, toured the territories. This year, they were inspecting the Pacific Northwest, and leading them was High Alpha Julian Cross. Even the name made grown men sweat. Julian Cross was the alpha of the Obsidian Pack, the Royal Guard. Rumor said he was nearly 7 feet tall, that his wolf was the size of a bear, and that he could crush a boulder with one hand. He was 30 years old, unmarried, and ruled with a code of iron and blood. He was the king of alphas. The morning of the arrival, Elara was awake at 4:00 a.m. Chef Miller had her polishing silver until her fingers bled. "Remember the rules," Miller hissed, checking his reflection in a soup spoon. "Eyes down, mouth shut, invisible." "I know, Chef." By noon, the convoy arrived. 6 black SUVs with tinted windows rolled up the long driveway, flanked by motorcycles. Elara watched from the narrow slit of the pantry window. She shouldn't be looking, but she couldn't help it. Declan and Jessica stood on the front steps. Jessica had bought a new dress, gold this time, trying to look regal. Declan looked nervous, constantly adjusting his tie. The lead car stopped. The door opened. A man stepped out. Elara's breath hitched. Julian Cross was everything the rumors said, and less. He wasn't a monster. He was terrifyingly beautiful. He wore a charcoal suit that struggled to contain the width of his shoulders. His hair was black as a raven's wing, cut short, and his eyes, even from this distance, Elara felt the weight of them. They were amber, burning, molten amber. He didn't smile. He didn't shake Declan's hand immediately. He stood there, scanning the perimeter of the manor, his nose flaring slightly as if testing the air. "Welcome, High Alpha," Declan said, bowing lower than Alara had ever seen him bow. "Sterling." Julian's voice was a low rumble, audible even through the glass. "Your perimeter security is lax. My gamma breached your southern fence 10 minutes ago." Declan paled. We will correct that immediately." "See that you do." Julian walked up the steps, ignoring Jessica entirely, which made Alara suppress a tiny smile. But just as he reached the threshold, Julian stopped. He went rigid. He turned his head, looking directly at the side of the house, directly at the pantry window. Alara gasped and ducked below the sill, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He saw me. He couldn't have, but he did. Inside the kitchen, the chaos began. The delegation was entering. "Dinner service is moved up," Miller shouted. "Alara, we're short-staffed. Sarah called in sick with the flu. You have to run the appetizers." Alara froze. "But..." Alpha Declan said. "I don't care what he said." Miller panicked. "If the High Alpha doesn't get his tartar in 5 minutes, I'm dead, which means you're dead. Put on a clean apron and get out there. Just keep your head down. He won't even notice a servant." Alara had no choice. She tied a fresh white apron over her drab grey uniform, smoothed her hair, and grabbed the heavy silver tray of venison tartar. Invisible, she told herself. "I am air. I am dust." She entered the dining room. The table was set for 20. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Declan was sweating, trying to impress Julian with talk of territory expansion. Julian sat at the head of the table, looking bored, swirling a glass of whiskey. Beside Julian sat his beta, a man named Silas, with a scar running down his face. Alara moved silently, serving the guests from the left. She reached the end of the table. She had almost made it. She approached Julian. As she stepped into his personal space to place the appetizer, the scent hit her. Usually alphas smelled like aggression, musk, testosterone dominance. Julian smelled like rain on hot stones. He smelled like ozone and cedar. It was the most intoxicating thing she had ever experienced. Her knees went weak. At the same moment, Julian's hand shot out. He didn't grab the plate. He grabbed her wrist. The contact sent a shockwave through the room. Alara gasped, almost dropping the tray. The skin where he touched her felt like it was being branded, but not with heat, with electricity. The room went deathly silent. Declan stood up his chair, scraping loudly. "High Alpha," Declan asked, his voice trembling. "Is the girl bothering you? I gave strict orders." Julian didn't look at Declan. He was staring at Alara's wrist. He was staring at the pulse point where her heart was fluttering like a hummingbird. He looked up. His amber eyes locked onto hers. For the first time in her life, Alara didn't feel the urge to look away. She felt pulled. "What is your name?" Julian asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was intense, curious. "Alara, my lord," she whispered. Alara. He tested the name on his tongue. He didn't let go of her wrist. He turned her hand over, looking at the redness, the calluses from scrubbing floors. His eyes narrowed, a flash of genuine anger crossing his face. "Why is a pack member serving food? This is work for staff, not a blood member." Jessica let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, High Alpha, you're mistaken. Alara isn't a real pack member. She's defective. She's 21 and hasn't shifted. She's an Omega, a charity case." Julian's gaze snapped to Jessica. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Defective," Julian repeated softly. "Yes," Declan chimed in, trying to regain control. "She's weak. Useless, really. We keep her around out of pity for her dead parents." Julian turned back to Ilara. He looked deep into her eyes, and for a second, Ilara swore she saw his pupils dilate, his irises swirling with gold. "She doesn't feel weak," Julian murmured, mostly to himself. He released her wrist slowly. The loss of contact made Ilara feel cold instantly. "Leave the tray," Julian commanded softly. And Ilara, she stopped, trembling. "Yes." "You smell of lavender," he said, an unreadable expression on his face. "It's pleasant." Ilara's face burned. She nodded and fled the room, limping as fast as she could. Behind her she heard Silas the Beta whisper to Julian. "Boss, you okay?" "I don't know," Julian replied, his voice low, but carrying to Ilara's sensitive ears. "But Silas, keep an eye on that girl. Something is wrong here. The energy inside her, it's not Omega energy. It feels dormant, like a volcano waiting to blow." Back in the kitchen, Ilara leaned against the sink, clutching her wrist. It still tingled. The voice in her head came back stronger this time. He knows, the voice purred. The king knows his own kind. His own kind, Ilara thought frantically. He's a high alpha. I'm a broken Omega. "No," the voice growled. "You are not broken. You are simply waiting for the right moon." And outside the window the clouds parted, revealing a moon that was fuller and brighter than it had been in years. The centennial moon was approaching. The morning after the arrival dinner, the tension in Greystone Manor was brittle enough to snap. The air was thick with the scent of coffee, burnt toast, and impending violence. Ilara was scrubbing the foyer floor on her hands and knees. Her wrist, where Julian had touched her, still felt warm, a phantom sensation that confused her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those amber eyes. Not the eyes of a monster, but of a man searching for something. "You missed a spot." The voice was sickly sweet. Ilara froze. A pair of red-bottomed Christian Louboutin heels stepped onto the wet marble she had just cleaned. Jessica Pree stood above her, holding a cup of steaming latte. She tilted her wrist, pouring the hot liquid onto the floor, mere inches from Ilara's scrubbing brush. "Oops," Jessica said, her face devoid of emotion. "Clean it up, and do a better job this time. The High Alpha is holding a strategy meeting in the library in an hour. If he sees this mess, he'll think we live in a pigsty." Ilara gritted her teeth, dipping her rag into the bucket. "Yes, Miss Jessica." "Don't call me Miss," Jessica hissed, leaning down. "You know I saw the way you looked at him last night. Do you really think a king would look at a cripple he was inspecting you, like one inspects a piece of rotting fruit?" He was disgusted. "I know my place," Ilara said quietly. "Do you?" Jessica straightened up, a malicious glint in her eyes. She reached into the pocket of her cashmere cardigan and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "Because I think you're a thief." Before Ilara could react, Jessica opened the pouch and dropped a pair of heavy diamond teardrop earrings into Ilara's bucket of dirty water. They sank with a quiet plop. "My grandmother's diamonds," Jessica screamed instantly, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Help someone help, the maid stole them." The library doors burst open. Declan stormed out, followed closely by his father, Elder Marcus, and several pack warriors. But behind them, silent and imposing, came Julian Cross and Silas. "What is the meaning of this?" Declan roared. "She stole them!" Jessica sobbed, pointing a manicured finger at Ilara. "I caught her trying to hide my grandmother's diamonds in her bucket. She was going to sneak them out with the trash." Ilara scrambled back, her hands wet and trembling. "No, Alpha. Please, she dropped them. I didn't touch them." Declan marched over and kicked the bucket over. The dirty water splashed across the white marble, and there, glittering amidst the grime, were the earrings. "The evidence is right there," Declan sneered. He looked at Ilara with pure loathing. Thievery is a crime, punishable by the whip in this pack, Elara. You know the laws." "I didn't do it," Elara cried, looking desperately at the crowd. Her eyes landed on Julian. The High Alpha was leaning against the library doorframe, his arms crossed over his massive chest. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone, but his nostrils were flaring slightly, inhaling the scent of the room. He could smell the deception Elara knew he could. An alpha of his power could smell the difference between the sweat of guilt and the pheromones of fear. "Say something," she begged silently. Julian pushed off the doorframe. "It seems unlikely." His deep voice cut through the shouting. "That a servant would hide diamonds in water. It ruins the setting." "She's stupid as well as a thief," Jessica countered, quickly clinging to Declan's arm. "Please, Declan. She disrespected me. She ruined my engagement party dress, and now this. She needs to be punished." Declan nodded. "Lock her in the cellar. We'll decide her punishment after the morning hunt." "Actually," Jessica interrupted, her eyes gleaming with a new, darker idea. "Why waste a good punishment? We need a fox for the hunt, don't we? The tradition says we release a fast omega for the warriors to track. It keeps their instincts sharp." The room went quiet. The fox run was an archaic tradition, usually played by fast-shifted wolves in a game of tag. But for a human-form girl with a bad leg, it wasn't a game. It was a massacre waiting to happen. "She can't shift, Jess," Declan said, hesitating. "She won't last 5 minutes. It's unsporting." "Give her a head start." Jessica shrugged. "If she makes it to the North River, she goes free. If we catch her, well, she learns a lesson about stealing." Declan looked at Julian. "High Alpha, would you object to a traditional run? It might be good exercise for your delegation." Julian's eyes narrowed. He looked at Elara, who was shaking on the floor. For a second, the air around him shimmered like heat rising off asphalt. "I will not participate in hunting a child," Julian said coldly. "But I will observe your pack's customs to see how the Sterling pack conducts itself." It wasn't a no. Elara felt her heart shatter. He wasn't going to save her. "Excellent," Jessica smiled. "Take her to the edge of the Blackwood Forest. Give her 10 minutes, then release the hounds." 2 warriors grabbed Elara by the arms, hauling her up. She screamed as her bad leg dragged against the floor, but they didn't stop. They dragged her out of the warmth of the manor and into the biting cold of the impending storm. As she was pulled through the door, she looked back one last time. Julian was still watching her. He hadn't moved, but his hand was gripping the doorframe so hard that the wood was splintering under his fingers. The Blackwood Forest was ancient. The trees were redwoods and Douglas firs so thick that they blocked out the grey sky. The ground was a carpet of wet needles and ferns, slippery and treacherous. Elara stood at the starting marker, a jagged stone covered in moss. She was shivering violently. They had taken her shoes. "Run, rabbit!" The Gamma warrior, a brute named Korg, sneered. He checked his watch. "You got 8 minutes left. If I catch you, I'm going to take a bite out of that pretty neck." Elara didn't wait. She turned and ran. Pain exploded in her leg immediately. It was a sharp, grinding agony in her hip, but adrenaline pushed it into the background. She forced herself into a loping run, favoring her right side. North River. I have to get to the North River. It was 3 miles away. Impossible. She scrambled up a ridge, her bare feet tearing on roots and rocks. The forest was silent, holding its breath. The birds had stopped singing. "Why won't you come?" she screamed at the dormant wolf inside her. "They are going to kill us." Not yet, the ancient voice rumbled deep in her marrow. "Let the fear burn away the human weakness. Let the pain break the lock." "Shut up!" Ilara gasped aloud, sliding down a muddy embankment. She hit the bottom hard, rolling into a creek. The freezing water soaked her thin uniform instantly. A howl pierced the air. It wasn't a distant howl. It was close. They had started early. Ilara scrambled up the other side of the creek, panic seizing her throat. She could hear the crashing of brush behind her, the heavy thudding of paws, snarls. She wasn't being hunted by men. She was being hunted by wolves. She pushed through a thicket of thorns, not caring as they tore at her skin. Blood trickled down her arms, the scent of copper filling the air. That would only attract them faster. She reached a clearing, the old quarry. It was a dead end, a sheer cliff dropping off into a rocky pit with the forest circling it. She spun around. Emerging from the trees were 5 wolves. In the lead was a massive grey wolf, Declan. Flanking him were 3 russet-coloured warriors, and behind them, laughing in human form, was Jessica. She had ridden on the back of a warrior, treating this like a safari. "Cornered already," Jessica called out, sliding off the wolf's back. She held a riding crop in her hand. "That wasn't very entertaining, Ilara. I thought fear would make you faster." Declan shifted back into human form, naked but unashamed, a cruel smirk on his face. "Pathetic. She's not even worth the chase." "Please!" Ilara gasped, backing up until her heels were on the edge of the quarry drop. "I didn't steal anything. Please let me go." "You're a waste of space, Ilara," Declan said, stepping forward. "My father should have killed you when your parents died. You're a gene defect. A wolf who can't shift is an abomination." "Maybe we should help her nature along," Jessica suggested. She walked forward and lashed out with the riding crop. The leather tip struck Ilara across the face. The pain was blinding. Ilara fell to her knees, clutching her cheek. "Look at her," Jessica laughed. "She bleeds like a human. She cries like a human. Just kill her, Declan. Say she tripped and fell into the quarry. No one will care. Not even the high alpha." Declan's eyes flashed yellow. He extended his claws. "Goodbye, Ilara." He lunged. Boom! A thunderclap shook the ground. But it wasn't thunder. A black blur exploded from the tree line. It moved faster than the eye could track. Declan was mid-air when he was intercepted. The black blur slammed into him with the force of a freight train, knocking the alpha 20 feet sideways into a massive oak tree. Declan hit the wood with a sickening crunch and slumped to the ground, wheezing. The clearing went silent. Standing over Ilara, shielding her from the pack, was a wolf, but not just any wolf. This beast was monstrous. It stood 5 feet at the shoulder. Its fur was midnight black, absorbing the light, but its eyes were burning molten amber. It was Julian. He didn't shift back. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his massive head and let out a growl that vibrated in Ilara's teeth. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated dominance. Jessica shrieked and fell backward. The other warriors dropped to their bellies, whining in submission. You did not challenge a high alpha in his wolf form. It was suicide. Julian turned his head to look at Ilara. His amber eyes softened. He nudged her bleeding cheek with his wet nose, a gesture of infinite tenderness. "Are you safe?" The voice in her head was clear, deep, and masculine. It was the mind link. Only mated pairs or high-ranking wolves could do that. I think so." Ilara wept, but the moment of safety was shattered. From the shadows of the quarry edge, a rogue arrow flew. It wasn't one of Declan's men. It was something else, an intruder in the confusion. The arrow tipped with wolfsbane, whistled through the air. Julian roared and twisted to block it, but he was too big, too close. The arrow wasn't meant for him. It was meant for Ilara. Julian took the impact. The arrow sank deep into his black shoulder. He roared in pain, his legs buckling slightly. Wolfsbane was poison fast-acting and agonizing. "No!" Ilara screamed. She grabbed his fur, trying to hold him up. Declan, recovering from the hit, saw his chance. He didn't know it was an assassination attempt. He just saw a weakened rival. "Get him!" Declan shouted to his warriors. "He's down. We can claim the high seat." It was treason. It was madness. But the scent of high alpha blood drove them into a frenzy. 3 warriors lunged at the wounded Julian. Ilara watched in horror as Julian, hampered by the poison, snapped the neck of the first attacker, but was overwhelmed by the others. They were biting, tearing at him. He was fighting for her, dying for her. Something inside Ilara snapped. It wasn't a mental snap. It was physical. It felt like her bones were being pulverized by a sledgehammer. She threw her head back and screamed. The sound that came out of her throat wasn't human. It was a harmonic resonance, a sound like a church bell ringing in a canyon. A beam of light, pure and golden, erupted from her chest. It blinded Jessica. It blinded Declan. The rain stopped mid-air. The wind died. Ilara's body contorted, lifting off the ground. Her skin began to glow, cracking like a ceramic shell. The gold. The ancient voice roared, no longer a whisper. The gold must rise. There was a flash of light that leveled the trees in a 50-yard radius. When the dust settled, Ilara was gone. Standing in her place was a wolf. She was smaller than Julian, but sleeker. Her fur was not grey, not brown, not white. It was gold, literally gold. Each strand of fur shimmered like spun bullion. Her eyes were violet, the color of royalty, the color of the ancient queens of legend. The golden wolf didn't growl. She didn't snarl. She simply stepped forward. The ground beneath her paws turned to glass from the sheer heat radiating off her body. Declan froze. The warriors attacking Julian froze. Even Julian, bleeding and panting, looked up in awe. The golden wolf looked at Declan. She opened her mouth and let out a sound that wasn't a howl. It was a command. "Kneel." It wasn't spoken. It was projected into the minds of every living thing in the forest. And for the first time in the history of the Sterling Pack, the Alpha didn't fight. His knees hit the dirt. But the golden wolf wasn't done. She looked at Jessica, who was cowering against a rock. The wolf took a step toward her. The heat intensified. Ilara was gone. The queen had arrived. The silence in the quarry was heavy, absolute, and terrified. The golden wolf stood over the prone body of High Alpha Julian Cross. Her fur was not just yellow. It was metallic, radiating a soft, pulsating luminescence that cut through the gloom of the Blackwood forest. Where her paws touched the moss, small white flowers bloomed instantly, accelerating through their life cycle in seconds. Declan Sterling remained on his knees, his forehead pressed into the mud. His wolf instincts, usually so arrogant and loud, were screaming at him to stay down. This was not a wolf he was facing. This was an apex, a deity wrapped in fur. Jessica, however, was human enough to be stupid. "Shoot it!" she shrieked, scrambling back toward the tree line, where 2 confused warriors stood with crossbows. "It's a monster! Kill it!" The warriors hesitated. Their wolves were whining, refusing to lift the weapons. The golden wolf turned her massive head toward Jessica. Her violet eyes narrowed. She didn't growl. She simply looked. A wave of heat, like the opening of a blast furnace, rolled across the clearing. Jessica screamed as the riding crop in her hand burst into flames. She dropped it, slapping at her singed palm, wailing like a child. Silence, the golden wolf's voice, echoed in everyone's mind. It was Ilara, but amplified, stripping away the stuttering servant girl and replacing her with an ancient authority. The wolf turned her attention back to Julian. The High Alpha was fading. The wolfsbane was a black web spreading through his veins, visible even under his dark fur. His breathing was shallow, a rattle in his massive chest. Elara lowered her head. She sniffed the wound on his shoulder. The scent of poison was acrid like burning rubber. My mate, the golden wolf, purred. My king. She did not know how she knew what to do. It was instinct buried in her DNA for 1,000 years. The golden wolf was not a warrior. She was a life-bringer. She was the sun that chased away the shadow. She leaned down and licked the open wound. As her tongue touched the blood, a blinding flash of light erupted. Julian's body arched off the ground. A low groan tore from his throat. Where the saliva of the golden wolf touched the poison, steam hissed into the air. The black veins began to recede, chased back by a glowing gold network of healing energy. The flesh knitted together before their eyes. The bone chipped by the arrow snapped back into place. Within 10 seconds, the wound was gone. Julian's eyes snapped open. The amber fire in them was back brighter than before. He scrambled to his feet, shaking his massive coat. He looked at the golden wolf. He didn't bow. A king does not bow, but he lowered his head, exposing his throat. The ultimate sign of trust. You found me. Julian's voice, linked with hers, filled with awe. I was always here, she replied. Suddenly the adrenaline crashed. The cost of the first shift, especially one of this magnitude, was immense. The golden wolf swayed. The light in her fur dimmed. She collapsed. Mid-fall, her form shimmered and shrank. By the time she hit the soft bed of ferns, she was Elara again. She lay curled in a fetal position, naked, shivering her skin, pale but glowing with a faint residual aura. Julian shifted instantly. In his human form, he ignored his own nakedness. He ripped the tattered remains of his suit jacket from the ground and draped it over Elara. He scooped her up in his arms, holding her against his chest as if she were made of glass. He turned to the sterling pack. His face was a mask of cold fury. His amber eyes promised a violence that would make history. "Silas!" Julian roared, his voice booming through the trees. From the ridge above, 20 black-clad warriors, the Obsidian Guard descended like shadows. They had heard the Alpha's roar and arrived seconds too late for the fight, but right on time for the war. "Secure the area," Julian commanded, his voice dark. "Arrest Declan Sterling. Arrest the woman. Arrest anyone holding a weapon." "On what charges? High Alpha?" Silas asked, eyeing the glowing girl in Julian's arms with wide eyes. Julian looked down at Elara, brushing a lock of dirty hair from her forehead. "High treason," Julian growled. "Attempted regicide, and crimes against the Crown." "The Crown," Declan stammered, raising his head from the mud. "She's just a maid. She's a defect." Julian stepped closer to Declan, looming over him. "She is a golden wolf," Julian hissed the sound, terrifyingly quiet. "She is the rarest creature on this earth. She is the fated mate of the High Alpha." He paused, letting the weight of his words crush Declan. "Which means Sterling. You just hunted my queen." 24 hours later, Greystone Manor was unrecognizable. The Sterling banners had been torn down. The Obsidian Pack's flag, a black wolf, on a silver shield hung from the rafters. The manor was under martial law. Every exit was blocked by a guard in tactical gear. Elara woke up in the master suite. She blinked, confused by the silk sheets, the scent of lavender and sandalwood, and the absence of the drafty attic wind she was used to. She tried to sit up, but her body ached. Not the sharp pain of her old injury, but a deep, muscular exhaustion. "Easy," a deep voice rumbled. Julian was sitting in a velvet armchair by the bed. He was dressed in a fresh black suit, pristine and terrifyingly handsome. He held a cup of tea. "You've been asleep for a day," he said softly, walking over to sit on the edge of the bed. He handed her the tea. Drink. It has honey. Elara took the cup, her hands trembling. The golden wolf, was it a dream? No. Julian smiled, and it was a genuine, breathtaking smile. You healed me, Elara. You saved my life. He reached out his fingers, grazing her cheek. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide? I didn't know, Elara whispered. I thought I was broken. They told me I was broken. Julian's face darkened. They lied, and now they will answer for it. He stood up, offering her a hand. Can you stand? The High Council has arrived. The court is in session. I can't go out there. Elara panicked. I'm just a servant. I don't have clothes. I don't know how to be a queen. Julian walked to the wardrobe and opened it. Inside hung a dress that looked like it was woven from moonlight and starlight, a deep, shimmering gold silk gown. You don't need to know how, Julian said fiercely. It is in your blood. You are a Vance. Do you know who your great-grandmother was? Elara shook her head. She was the last golden wolf. She ended the Great War of the Packs, Julian explained. Your blood is royal, Elara, more royal than mine. Now put this on. Today we do not serve. Today we rule. An hour later, the doors to the grand hall opened. The room was packed, not just with the sterling pack who stood huddled in the corners, terrified, but with the High Court. 12 elders sat at a long table on the dais, men and women in grey robes, who governed the laws of the species. In the centre of the room, kneeling in chains, were Declan Sterling, Jessica Pree, and, shockingly, Declan's father, Elder Marcus Sterling. All rise for High Alpha Julian Cross and his mate, the herald announced. The room went deadly silent as Julian walked in. He looked every inch the king, but all eyes were on the woman beside him. Elara walked with a slight limp, but her head was high. The gold dress clung to her, and her hair, washed and brushed, cascaded down her back like liquid honey. Her violet eyes scanned the room. She didn't look at the floor. They ascended the dais. Julian sat on the central throne. He gestured for Elara to sit on the slightly smaller throne beside him. This tribunal is now in session. Elder Halloway, the head of the council, announced. He was a stern man with white hair. We are here to address the charges against the Sterling leadership. This is a farce, Elder Marcus Sterling shouted from his chains. You cannot arrest an elder. I have diplomatic immunity. And that girl is a fraud, a genetic experiment gone wrong. Julian leaned forward. Silence. I will not be silent, Marcus spat. My son hunted a rogue on his own territory. That is his right. If the girl got in the way, that is her fault. He hunted a human, Julian corrected. And he attempted to kill the High Alpha. Accidents happen in the heat of the chase, Marcus sneered. He looked at the other elders. Colleagues, surely you see this. Julian is love-struck by a pretty face. He is fabricating charges to elevate a servant girl to queen. It degrades us all. A murmur of agreement went through the table. The elders were conservative. They hated change. A servant becoming a queen, it was unheard of. We need proof of her lineage. Elder Halloway stated, looking skeptically at Elara. Without a blood test or a witnessed shift, she is just an omega. We cannot take the word of a lover. Jessica, kneeling on the floor, let out a hysterical laugh. See, even they know she's trash. She's nothing. She faked the light. It was a flashbang or something. Elara felt the anger rising again. Not the hot, chaotic anger of the quarry, but a cold, heavy pressure in her chest. She looked at Julian. He nodded slightly. Show them. Elara stood up. She didn't shift. She didn't need to. She simply let the barrier in her mind drop. She released her aura. It wasn't a wave of force. It was a wave of gravity. The air in the room turned gold. The temperature spiked. The pressure dropped so low that ears popped. "You ask for proof," Ilara spoke. Her voice was layered, the human voice, and the wolf voice speaking in unison. She stepped down from the dais, walking toward the table of elders. "My father was Thomas Vance," Ilara said, her voice ringing off the stone walls. "He was the true alpha of this pack. And you," she pointed a finger at Elder Marcus, "you murdered him." "Lies!" Marcus screamed, though sweat was pouring down his face. "I saw it," Ilara said. The memory had unlocked with her wolf. "I was 10. I was hiding in the closet. It wasn't rogues. It was you. You wanted the land. You wanted the mine. And you knew my bloodline was a threat." She turned to the High Council. The elders were shifting in their seats, struggling to breathe under the weight of her aura. "You sit there and judge me?" Ilara challenged them. "You who allowed this man to sit among you. You who let an entire pack rot under a tyrant. You are not judges. You are accomplices. Watch your tone, girl." Elder Holloway stammered, his face red. "We are the High Court. You will show respect." Ilara smiled. It was a terrifying expression. "Respect is earned," she said softly. Her eyes glowed violet. The gold light around her flared blindingly bright. "On your knees!" The command hit the room like a physical blow. It wasn't just the wolves who felt it. The timber of the building groaned. The glass in the windows vibrated. Elder Holloway tried to resist. He gripped the table, his knuckles white, his alpha dominance fighting back. But a golden wolf is not an alpha. She is an alpha of alphas. Holloway's knees buckled. He crashed to the floor. One by one, the High Council, the most powerful wolves on the continent, slid from their chairs. They didn't want to. They were fighting it with every ounce of their pride. But their biology gave them no choice. The entire dais was empty. The elders were on the floor, heads bowed, gasping for air. In the center of the room, Declan and Marcus were flattened, their noses pressed to the stone, whimpering. Jessica had fainted from the sheer pressure. Ilara stood alone, the only one standing in a room of 200 people. She walked over to Elder Holloway, who was trembling. "You wanted to see my wolf," she whispered. "Beg her for mercy, or I will burn this manor to the ground with you inside it." "Mercy." Holloway choked out tears of humiliation streaming down his face. "Please, Your Majesty. Mercy. Mercy," Marcus screamed from the floor. "I beg you. Mercy." The chant started from the back of the room, from the Sterling Pack members who had tormented her for years. Chef Miller, the warriors, the guests. Ilara looked at Julian. He was sitting on the throne, the only other person not kneeling because his golden wolf would never force him. He was watching her with a look of pure, burning devotion. Ilara withdrew her aura. The pressure vanished. The room collapsed into the sound of weeping and gasping breath. "Get up," Ilara said coldly. "We have work to do." The silence following Ilara's display of power was broken only by the scratching of a quill. Elder Holloway, now pale and humble, was frantically writing the official decree of succession. The other elders sat in stunned silence, their arrogance stripped away by the sheer gravity of the golden wolf's presence. Ilara stood before the dais, her hand resting in Julian's. His grip was warm, steady, an anchor in the storm she had created. "The evidence is irrefutable." Elder Holloway announced, his voice trembling slightly. Thomas Vance was the rightful alpha. His murder by Marcus Sterling is confirmed by the testimony of the Queen's memory. By the ancient laws, the Sterling line is forfeit. Marcus Sterling, still pinned to the floor by the guards, spat blood. "You cannot do this. I built this pack. I made it strong. You made it a graveyard, Elara said softly. She looked down at the man who had ordered her parents' death. You didn't build a pack, Marcus. You built a prison, and today I am tearing it down. What is your judgment, my queen? Julian asked, his voice ringing with pride. As High Alpha, I will execute your will. Elara looked at the three prisoners, Marcus, Declan, and Jessica. Marcus Sterling. Elara began, her voice devoid of emotion. For the murder of Alpha Thomas Vance and Luna Elena Vance, and for high treason against the crown, you are sentenced to the Veil. A gasp went through the room. The Veil was not a prison. It was the execution chamber where a wolf was put to sleep. With wolf's bane, their essence returned to the earth. It was a permanent end. Declan, Elara continued, shifting her gaze to her former tormentor. He was weeping now, a pathetic shadow of the arrogant bully he had been. You hunted me for sport. You led a pack with cruelty. You are not fit to carry the spirit of the wolf. She raised her hand. I sentence you to the severing. Declan screamed. No, kill me, just kill me. The severing was a fate worse than death. A mystic ritual where the wolf spirit was forcibly ripped from the human host. He would live but as a human, weak, sensory blind, and forever feeling the phantom pain of his missing half. He would be exiled to the human world with no memory of the pack to live a mundane, lonely life. Take them away, Julian commanded. The Obsidian guards dragged the screaming men out of the hall. Finally, Elara turned to Jessica. Jessica was trembling so violently, her teeth chattered. She had been the queen bee, the cruel socialite, who had made Elara's life a living hell for 3 years. And me, Jessica whispered. I didn't kill anyone. I just wanted to be Luna. You wanted to be royalty, Elara corrected. But you behaved like a tyrant. You mocked the weak. You stole. You lied. Elara walked down the steps until she stood directly in front of Jessica. She reached out and touched the pearl necklace around Jessica's neck. You love pretty things, don't you, Jessica? Elara asked. Yes, Jessica sobbed. And you hate dirt. You hate labor. Elara pulled her hand back. I will not exile you. You will stay here at Greystone Manor. Jessica's eyes lit up with hope. Thank you. Oh, thank you. You will stay, Elara continued, her voice hardening, as the head of the sanitation staff. You will wash the floors I washed. You will scrub the dishes I scrubbed. You will live in the servants' quarters in the attic. And every time you look at a dirty stain, you will remember that you are cleaning the house of the queen you tried to destroy. Jessica's face crumbled. It was a life sentence of humiliation. No, please. Chef Miller is looking for help, Elara said, turning her back on her. Report to the kitchen immediately. If you are late, you will be exiled to the Rogue Lands. Jessica scrambled up, tripping over her dress, and ran toward the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. The room erupted into applause. It started low with the servants who had been abused for years and swelled until even the elders were clapping. Justice had not just been served, it had been poetic. Julian pulled Elara into his arms. He didn't care about the audience. He kissed her a deep, searing kiss that sealed their bond before the entire court. You are terrifying, he murmured against her lips. I learned from the best. She smiled, her violet eyes sparkling. So, Julian whispered, Greystone Manor is yours. Will you stay here? Rule the Sterling pack. Elara looked around the grand hall. It was filled with bad memories, but now the air felt lighter. The oppression was gone. But her heart didn't belong to these stone walls. No, Elara said. This pack needs a fresh start. I will appoint a new alpha, someone kind. Someone like Silas. Julian raised an eyebrow. And you, I am the Golden Wolf, Elara said, resting her head on his chest. My place is with the king. Julian grinned, lifting her up in his arms as the crowd cheered. Then let's go home, my queen. As they walked out of the heavy oak doors, the storm clouds that had plagued the region for weeks finally broke. The sun, real golden sunlight, pierced through, bathing the couple in a warm glow. Elara Vance, the weak Omega, the maid, the mistake was gone. In her place stood a legend, and the world would never dare mock her again. And that is the story of how a single drop of gold turned an ocean of darkness into light. Elara's journey reminds us that your current situation is not your final destination. They can mock your struggle, they can underestimate your silence, but they can never steal your destiny. Sometimes the people who treat you the worst are simply preparing you for a throne they could never sit on. If you enjoyed this story of justice, romance, and the rise of the Golden Queen, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a part of our next saga. And tell me in the comments, do you think Jessica deserved her punishment, or was it too harsh? I read every single comment. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.